Kakalos Bokato Masechet Yoma Samech Daled Amud Aleph 64A1 Masechet Yoma. Says the Gemara. Rava Amar. Yeah, Rava comes and he wants to say this is going to be now a third case where the pasuk is going to say that it's going to be pasul when something is going to be mechusar zman, when we're lacking time, to do with the concept of the Sayyid Mishtaleach. Remember, the Sayyid Mishtaleach is a Sayyid that you're going to throw right off the cliff. So it says like this. Rava comes and he says, Kegon, for example, Shayalo chole betoch beto. Imagine a person came and what happened was he already sold his Sayyid to the tzibur. And he's got a chole sheish bo sakana in his house that you're allowed to be mechalel Yom Kippur. V'shachat imo b'Yom Kippurim. Now he slaughtered the mother of the Sayyid Mishtaleach on Yom Kippur in order to give it to the chole on Shabbat. Now 1 second, we know that there's halacha. Are you allowed to slaughter a mother and child on the same day? No. So here you have a big problem. And the problem is, what's going to happen over here? So therefore, since now you're not allowed to slaughter on the same day, it comes out that after the goral, after the slaughtering, it becomes mechusar zman. We're lacking time. And therefore, in such a case, the word la Hashem, which is coming to teach you the mechusar zman, is going to be pasul for Sayyid al-Azazel, even though it was proper at the time of the goral. Which means at the time of the goral, were they both fitting? Yes. But 10 minutes after the goral, 20 minutes after the goral, or an hour after the goral, there's somebody at home that he has a chole sheish bo sakana. For a chole sheish bo sakana, are you allowed to be mechalel kippur? Are you allowed to be mechalel Shabbat? Yes. Chole sheish bo sakana. Chole means a person that's sick, that there's a danger, they could die at any moment. So therefore, you're allowed to be mechalel Shabbat or mechalel kippur. So what did he do? He came and he did shechita on the mother. Now you have the child in the Bet HaMikdash, so you just did do the goral. Now you can't do anything with it. So therefore, that's going to be a problem. So says the Gemara, so therefore it's going to be a problem, yeah. So he says, he says, are you going to tell me now, right, that it's a problem? Why? It says, lo tishchatu. You're not allowed to do the shechita. Amarach mana. Ba'alav shechita. Here it's not shechita. What do you do with the Sayyid HaMishtaleach? What do you do with the Sayyid HaMishtaleach? Yeah? Samech Dalet, 64A1. Yeah, what do you do with the Sayyid HaMishtaleach?
Throw it down the hill.
Where? You throw it down the har. You throw it down the mountain. You throw it off the cliff. Do you do shechita to it? No. So it's only said lo tishchatu b'yom echad. You're not allowed to do the shechita on the same day, but you're allowed to throw it off the mountain. So what is the problem then? Even if the guy is going to come and do shechita on the mother, there's no problem. So answers the Gemara, Hamli b'ma'arava, they said it in Eretz Yisrael, techiyato latzuk zo ishchitato. When they throw it off the cliff, that in itself is like the shechita. That's a shechita. What's the difference? It's even better. You understand? So that's what he's saying. It's like a shechita, the fact that you throw it off the cliff. Right? Very good. So says the Gemara, im shel shem met, ze she'ala alav. So we just said, if the sa'id, right, of Shem, which means to Hashem, dies, so then the Kohen Gadol is going to come and he's going to say, ze she'ala alav goral is now going to become tachtav. Okay, and if it was Azazel, so then he says, the ze she'ala alav goral Azazel is going to be this one tachtav. So Amar Rav says, sheni shebezug rishon yikrav. Right, which means the other one, which is still alive, which is from the first zug, right, is going to be brought. Okay, sheni shebezug sheni yir'eh. The second one from the second group is going to graze until it gets a defect, and then you're going to sell it. Rabbi Yochanan says, no. Sheni shebezug rishon yir'eh. The second one of the first group is going to be yir'eh ad sheyistayev, is going to be grazing until it's going to get something negative. The sheni shebezug sheni yikrav, and the second one of the second one, he's going to be brought. So there's a machloket, which one has to graze until it gets a defect, and which one is brought on the mizbeach? Is it the second one of the first group, or the second one of the second group? That's the question. Okay. So Maika mipalge, what exactly is the machloket right between them? Rav savar baalei chayim en anidachim. Rav held that the baalei chayim are not going to be pushed off, right, from the hakrava, from bringing your broth. Okay, so therefore, if it happened to the korban that there was going to be a shat psul before the shechita, and then they fixed this defect, so then it's still fitting for the korban, which means baalei chayim are not pushed off. And the fact that we said the Balei Chaim are not pushed off, they're not completely destroyed, because they're not rejected, so therefore it's going to be okay. Rabbi Yochanan holds Balei Chaim nidachin legamre, that the Balei Chaim are going to be completely rejected, which means once the Seir HaMishtaleach dies, so then the Seir Lashem automatically becomes rejected forever. And therefore, you have to bring always the second group you can never bring from the first group whatsoever. Okay? Make sense? My Ta'ama, what's the reasoning of Rav? So he says, the alif, mechusar zman, which means you're learning the psul of a behemah before the 8th day, right? To mechusar zman over here. Lava falgav dasha, even though right now it's not going to be fitting. Kihada mixes shapidami, later on it's going to be fitting. Hachanami loshna, so to here, there's no difference between them, which means that again, it's going to be fitting for, going to be kosher for akava, for being brought. So says the Gemara, midami, can you compare both cases? Hatam lo itchaze klal. There, the animal was not fitting at all, which means from the time of birth until the 8th day, it was never fitting this animal. But here, the animal was fitting, but it was pushed off. So since it was actually pushed off, so therefore that's going to be the problem. Okay? Which means the animal that's born was never fitting. So therefore, until the 8th day, then it's going to be fitting. But it was never fitting, and now it starts becoming fitting. Here we're talking about that it was fitting and then it was pushed off. Two completely different halachot. Okay? But rather the reasoning of Rav is, because he's going to be learning it from a balmum over. What does it mean, a balmum over? We know that when there's going to be a blemish, right, there's a difference between a balmum kavua and balmum over. Balmum kavua means that it's got a fixed blemish and it's not going to heal. Balmum permanent, right? Balmum over is something that it's going to be over. What does it mean over? Over means that it's going to pass by, meaning that right now maybe it broke a leg, but then it's going to become better, right? It's temporary, right? Then it's not something that's going to be a permanent one. So he says like this. He says we learn from a balmum over. Balmum over lava fagavdolo chazi yasha. Even though the balmum over right now it's not fitting. Kiada mixes shaperdami, but when it is going to be fitting, it's going to be okay. So hakanami lo shna. So to here there shouldn't be any difference between them. So answers the Gemara behata minalan. So over here, how do we know then? Right? How do we know to do the balmum over? How do we know that you're allowed to bring it after the mum already passed? Tichtiv, as it says in the pasuk, ki moshchatam b'hem mum bam. What does it mean? Mum bam hu delo yeretze. You're not allowed to bring it when it has the mum. Ha'avar mumo muman yeratzu. If the mum already left, you're allowed to benefit from it. Okay? Fine. Rabbi Yochanan comes and he says, Miyet rachamana bahem. He's coming to exclude because the word bahem. What does that mean? Only in a case of a balmem mum, if it passes the mum, it's not going to be right. It's going to be iratzu. But any type of a rejection, once it's rejected, it's rejected. So that's a machlok between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav. Okay, so Rav is learning from balmum over. When it's got the balmum, when it's got the blemish, it's a problem. When it passes the blemish, there's no problem. And Rabbi Yochanan is learning, right? And Rabbi Yochanan is coming and he's learning. No. That it has to do with only balmum, if it passes the time, is it going to be the problem or not? But to do with any other type of a dichui, once it's rejected forever. That's it. That's a shita of Rabbi Yochanan. Okay? Yeah, what? No, nothing to do with a permanent mum. One more time. If it's going to be, Rav learns from a mum, a blemish, mum over. Only when it has this mum, that it's a temporary mum, is it disqualified. Once the disqualification passes, it's kosher. Rabbi Yochanan comes and he learns it that only by a balmum over does that count. Any other type of a rejection, which is not a balmum, any other type of rejection, once it's rejected once, kaddish, it's rejected forever. That's a shita of Rabbi Yochanan. So the Rav, and according to Rav, hahu bahem be'enayu delo mirzu. He says when it says ki moshchatam bahem, he says the word bahem is dafka by ba'ale mumin, right, which are not going to be accepted in front of Hashem. But if it's going to get mixed up with other animals, mirtzu, it is going to be accepted. And this is like the shita of Rabbi Eliezer. As we learned in the Mishnah, evarim temimim be'evarim ba'alei mumim. What happens now if you get mixed up between evarim temimim and evarim ba'alei mumim? Which means we have different limbs of sacrifices. And all of a sudden you had limbs of a sacrifice which is a tamima, which means that there's no blemish, that go mixed up with the limbs of the sacrifices that got blemished. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Im karav rosh shelecha mehen, if one of the heads were brought, yakrivu kol harashim kulan. So you're going to bring all the rest of them. Why? Because we're going to say that the first one was a balmum, right? And the other ones were only kosher. Kirav shelecha mehen, if only one of the legs are going to be brought, yakrivu kol hakarayim kulan. Chachamim say no. Afilu karvu kulan chutz mecha mehen yetzelebet. Even if they brought everyone except for one, that one has to be taken out to the bet sirfa. Meaning, I'm not going to say tolin, that I'm going to say that the one that you already brought was the balmum, and therefore now you could continue bringing it. No, doesn't work. Okay? Ve'idach, and the other amura, nafkale mi bam bahem. He's learning it from the concept of bam and bahem. Why? He says it could have been written bam, moshatam bam. Why does it say bahem, which is an extra hay? The extra hay is coming to teach you that it's not going to be pasul betarovet. It's not going to disqualify when it gets into a mixture. Okay, v'idach, and the other amura, which is Rav, bam bahem lo dari. She doesn't like this thing about bam bahem, an extra hay. People, they just talk extra hay, no extra hay. It's all the same. Selam and shos. Yeah, there's no difference. So he says no.
For this time.
Yeah, for this time. So he says ulav, according to Rav, nehina midbale chaymin and nidachin ibaye hay nakriv ibaye hay nakriv. He says even though we just said that animals are not going to be completely pushed off, which means that as they're still going to be fitting to bring. Nevertheless, it's still the same deen that if you want, you could bring one sayid or you could bring the other one because they're both going to be kosher. So why is it that Rav said specifically bring from the first group? If according to Rav, they're both kosher, so why do you have to specifically bring right from the first group? Bring from whichever one you want. Which one you want to bring? The first, bring from the first. Bring from the second, whichever one that you want. So answers the Gemara. Amar Rava says, Rav Sab like Rabbi Yosef. Rav holds like Rabbi Yosef. The Amar mitzvah b'rishon. That he says the mitzvah is in the first one. Now, which Rabbi Yosef are we referring to? The mitzvah is in the first one. Hi, Rabbi Yosef. Which Rabbi Yosef? Inema Rabbi Yosef the kupot. If you're going to tell me now, it's Rabbi Yosef of kupot, which means there's kupot of the Trumat Alishka. You remember we said that there were tzedakah boxes. So there's a mitzvah to first finish off the first one, and then you go to the second one, and then you go to the third one. Which means that they had three different kupat tzedakah. One of them had aleph, one of them had bet, and one of them gimel. So therefore, you already know that was the order of how it was given. Meaning, when they already gave money to the aleph, the gimel still didn't exist, right? And that's the order they have to do it. Which one?
Only give to one kupa.
No. But there are three kupot. Once that kupa is filled, you give to the second one. Once that kupa is filled, you give to the third one. But it's all the same kupa. Same kupa means it's for the same purpose, right? It's for the same purpose. Okay. So it says the term as we learned on the Mishnah and Shekalim. Shalosh kupot shel shalosh sayin shebaen tolmim et alishka. There were three different kupat tzedakah that each of them were able to contain three se'in in every single one of them. That they used to be torem, right? Their money to the lishka for the Bet Hamikdash. The katuv alein, it was written on them aleph bet gimel. The Tanya we learned on the right. Amar Yosef says of Yosef. Why is it written aleph bet gimel? So it says Gemara leidaz meheni terma rishon, to know which one was given first. Lavi amena rishon, to bring that one first. Why? Shemitzvah barishon, which means the first one is there. That's a mitzvah. Maybe I want to do the last ones. No. The first ones, that's a mitzvah. The mitzvah is always in the first ones. After that, it's already the remainder. So you go according to order. The first come, first serves. Yeah, that's the concept. You do the first, then the second, and then the third.
Because they were mitmalot.
Dilma shane hata, maybe it's different over there. Maybe you cannot compare the case of the kupot. You know why? When people gave in the first kupa, did the third kupa exist? You have three kupot tzedakah. Does it exist? No, it doesn't exist because it's nothing there, right? They didn't give anything there, right?
It's going to be a third one.
It's going to be a third one later on, but right now, does it exist? No, because if you have money, where are you going to put it? In Gimel or the first one in Aleph? So therefore, that's what he's saying. Din mashan hata. Maybe it's different over there in the Shita of Rabbi Yosef, because during the first time of the kupa, there wasn't fitting the second one. There was nothing there, which means that's why it's going to be disqualified. And that's why the mitzvah is always very short.
Until they finish the first one.
So they finish the first one, then they start filling up the second one, then they start filling up the third one. So says the Gemara, you're right. So rather it has to be Rabbi Yosef from Pesach. We already know this Gemara. This is a chazara. But then rather this is Rabbi Yosef of Pesach. The Tanya was learned on the right time. Imagine right now you separated your Korban Pesach, the Avad, and it got lost. So you separated the second one. And afterwards we found the first one. Now both of them are in front of you. According to the rabbis, whichever one you want, you could bring. And you could bring the first Korban Pesach or the second Korban Pesach, whichever one. You only could bring one, but you decide. Whichever one you want, you bring. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosef says, no, mitzvah barishon. You have to bring the first one. Why is the first one? Because that was the first one. So you see from here that we always go at the first one. Samech Daled Amud Bet, 64b. So says the Gemara, however, though, if the second one was better, right, was more, a better quality, so on and so forth, so then you bring the second one. That means even according to Rabbi Yosef, we do say mitzvah is barishon, right? Even though, right, it says over here, before separating the second one, when you had the first Korban Pesach, did the second Korban Pesach exist? No, right? So therefore, right, here you could even bring the second one, even before the first one, if it was better in quality. But mitzat sheni, you do see that there's a mitzvah barishon always, which means not like the rabbis that say whichever one you want you could bring. There is a mitzvah to bring the first one, right? So therefore, now says the Gemara, this is where the Rabbi Yosef was, the case of the Pesach, the Korban Pesach. Okay. Now we're going to explain the machloka between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rava comes and he says, Rav. We actually could deduce from a Mishnah like Rav. But we have a Braita which is like Rabbi Yochanan. Why? We learned in our Mishnah, what happens if the one of the one which went to Hashem, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that was the one that died? So the second group now, that one that's going to be now for the Shem, he's going to be instead of it. The other one, you still leave from the first group, right? From the Zug Rishon. So that was like Rav, which says like Rabbi Yosef, the mitzvah barishon. Now, Braita kavated Rabbi Yochanan. The Braita is like according to Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Tiktani sheni, because it says v'sheni that sheyister. Any yodaim sheni shebezug rishon and sheni. Which sheni? Sheni of the first group or sheni of the second group? So Kishu Omer Ya'omad Chai. When it says in the pasuk Ya'omad Chai, it's mashma, right? Velo sheyamod chavero shemet, right? Which means that it has to be from the second one. But the first one, which was already nikvala azazel, it's not fitting anymore to send it off. So therefore, it's mashma like Rabbi Yochanan, and that's in the Braita. So says the Gemara, my mashma, why is Ya'omad Chai telling you that the first one died and Ya'omad Chai is on the second group, that they're both going to be alive? So says the Gemara, Ya'omad Chai velo shekvar amad. Ya'omad Chai is right now it's standing, not that it was already standing before. So therefore, we're obviously talking about the second group, right? Yeah. So now we learned in the Mishnah. The Odam Rabbi Yehuda also said Rabbi Yehuda, Ishpach Adam Yamutu Mishdalech. If the blood spilled of the Seir Lashem before sprinkling it, right? What do? Yamutu Mishdalech. The Seir Mishdalech has to be killed also, right? It has to die, right? Meta Mishdalech. If it was other way, right? The Mishdalech was killed, right? Meaning not killed, it died, right? Before the sprinkling of the blood. Yishafech Adam.
The minute you treat the blood come out.
Which one?
This is the
no, but the Nishpach Adam, it's spilled before doing it.
It's spilled before, sure it does spill. Then
no, the second that you do the Shechita, remember that there's another Kohen right beside you, right? And he gives the receptacle to the Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol right away comes and he starts collecting the blood. Okay? So therefore, if the blood now spills before sprinkling it, now it's going to be a problem. So Bishama Rabbi Yochanan Damar Balei Chaim Nidchim. It's good according to Rabbi Yochanan that he says that animals are going to be rejected. Because of that, that's why the Seder Mishlech has to die. But according to Rav, that he says Baalei Chaim are not pushed off. Why Yamuta Mishlech? At the end of the day, if it's going to be alive during the time when the blood was sprinkled, and therefore he says over here, right? So therefore, when you're going to do now the Shechita and the other Said, right? The Shem, it's going to be Batel Eikuv, and therefore it goes back to its original mitzvah. So Rav is going to tell you, I'll leave it to Rabbi Yehuda. I mean, I'm not talking about according to Rabbi Yehuda, because you're right. According to Rabbi Yehuda, for sure, Baalei Chaim are going to be rejected. When we talk about according to the rabbis, they argue in Rabbi Yehuda and they hold that the animals are not rejected. Okay? So Bisham al Rav, it's good according to Rav that he's going to say that Baalei Chaim are not going to be rejected. Because in this is a svara that they are arguing Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, right, what's the machloket then between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan? Right, what's the machloket between them? So he says, Rava says, that's why we said that it's true, that it's more meduyak, the Mishnah like Rav, which means we already said that our Mishnah is more precise like Rav and not like Rabbi Yochanan. That's what we said at the beginning. So this is true, 100%. That's what we just said from our Mishnah. Okay? Now we're going to try to bring another proof to Rabbi Yochanan from a Mishnah. Because remember, when you have a proof to somebody from a Mishnah and you have a proof from somebody to a Braita, what's stronger? The Mishnah, obviously. Right? The Mishnah is much stronger. So it says, so now we learned in the Mishnah, She'en chatat tzibur meta. We just said that what happens right now, if the second one, right, we just said the second one is going to be grazing until it gets a blemish. She'en chatat tzibur meta, because the chatat tzibur is not going to die, which means only a chatat tzibur is not meta when you already have a kapara with another animal. But if it's going to be from, right, in a yachid, had yachid kaigam, the meta, it does die. So bisham al Rabbi Yochanan, I understand according to Rabbi Yochanan, right? Rabbi Abba bar Amarav, just like Rabbi Abba bar Amarav. The Amar Rabbi Abba Amarav, because this is Rabbi Abba Amarav, right? Samechei Amud Aleph, just on the top. It says that kol modim, everyone is going to come and they're going to be modim. They're going to agree. She'in nitkaper b'she'en avuda, avuda meta. What happens right now if you had the atonement in the second chatat, which means the second chatat was separated after the first one was lost, and then so what do we say? Avuda meta, which means that also here the Yom Kippurim is like the Saeed for the Shem from the first one that got lost. So therefore, since it was already pushed off when the Saeed Lazazel died, so therefore it comes out that according to Rabbi Yochanan, why did the Tanakama say that it shouldn't die, the first one? Only because it's a Chatat Tzibur, but it's mashma that if it was a Chatat Yachid, it would have died. So therefore, right, the first one is going to die, whether according to Rebbe or whether according to Rabbanan. So this is actually a proof to Rabbi Yochanan. So it says, but according to Rav, it's like you separated lechatechila, two different chataot, two different sin offerings. And Rav Yoshia comes and he says, if you separated two different chataot, you're going to do whichever one you want, right? You could do. Meaning whichever one of the animals you want, you could bring. And the second one is the one that's going to be tir'eh, right? You have to wait and let it graze until it gets a blemish. So the Gemara answers, Kevan Damar Rava, since Rava comes and he says, Savala, right? He says, Rav Savala Rabbi Yosedam and Savrishon, Miikara kemafrish leibud dami. From the beginning, once you're already separating the second one, it's like already consider that you want it to go, that it's going to go leibud. And therefore, it's not any different from if you're going to have a chatat, which is going to get lost, that it's going to die according to Rebbe. And therefore, Rav is going to say that our Mishnah is according to Rebbe, and it's not a proof that it's going to Rabbi Yochanan. And tomorrow we continue from Tlan. Have a wonderful